Paul Harrell, weekdays from 4 to 6. Learn more at paulharrell.com.
I sat down with State Representative Marcus Richmond this afternoon at 3 and asked him what his impression of the session was, and this is what he told me. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the program. We have State Representative Marcus Richmond with us from District 21. Marcus, welcome back.
Hi, pleasure to be here, Paul.
So we've been doing these things with many of your colleagues called the impression of the session, and I know it's August and it's been several months since the session's concluded, but feel free to make an opening statement. You can be as brief or as long as you want. What was your impression of the session 2017?
Well, I think that there was some things that we did, and we did it well, but at the same time, I think there was room for improvement. Specifically, having priorities. I think that a lot of times we get kind of so many things are going on that we get spread so thin that we don't really take care of some of the more important things. And what I'm talking about specifically is really focusing on trying to do something about our funding for the roads. That, we need to be, I believe, just a little more imaginative than constantly trying to figure out some way to increase some tax somewhere. And then dealing with, the internet sales and those type of things, you can say what you want, tell everybody that it's not a new tax, but if you haven't been paying it, as far as everybody's concerned, it is a new tax. And that at some point it's going to be critical for us to collect this, then the people need to know why and what we're going to do with that money. And that was my big question, is if you're going to collect this money, what are you going to do with it? It doesn't necessarily need to go into general revenue where maybe all you'll end up doing is just growing more government. And so with those things going on, I'll have to say I was happy when Sunny Dog come along so that we could go home.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of head scratching going on. I mean, your remarks, they certainly mirror some of your colleagues, just in terms of, I've heard the term frustration. And the term frustration really is just in the context of, what's in the Republican Party platform and trying to get more revenue from us, whether it's the gas tax, the internet tax, or, then there was the tax on tires. There was some stuff that did get passed, but then there was some really good defense from conservatives that were saying, you know what, enough's enough. And so what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on, it seems to me that the leadership of the party is, maybe ignoring. I actually think they are. They're just ignoring some of the basic tenets that Republicans get elected on. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that what happens is that there's so much pressure to try to resolve some of these long-standing issues. And again, because I'm on Public Transportation Committee, I always come back to that it doesn't matter what kind of idea that gets thrown out there about adjusting funding or trying to come up with revenue. And again, I like the idea of taking existing revenue and redirecting it. But, when you try that, there's always someone out there that is going to jump up and scream loud and just cause a fit that it's going to destroy them if you move a few dollars away from their particular budget in some way. And that type of stuff is what causes so much frustration. I think that we do need to take time, especially, if we're going to call ourselves Republicans, and we need to look at the party platform and consider what's in that as far as, smaller, more efficient government, trying to be efficient with the tax revenue, looking for ways that we can allow the people to keep as much money as possible. And I think that in order to do that, and again, this is one of my frustrations, I was happy that, there was some tax cuts, but then when you look at how the tax cuts were done, we really just kind of shifted obligations around. And in order to really cut taxes, you've got to find some place to cut some spending. And we just didn't do that effectively. And I think part of it, Paul, is that when you look at the House, we're there part-time, and so, the executive committee is always, since term limits, they and the lobbyists and the bureaucrats have pretty much run the government. And so, though I'm not for just being able to go up there and stay forever, I think our term limits were too short with 6 years, because by the time you figured out what was happening, you were gone, and that allowed people just to wait you out. I'm hoping that we get smarter and get better.
You mentioned spending, and if I remember, and I may not have my exact timing correctly, but you guys, adjourned and took the recess, the month-long recess or whatever, before you come back and sine die. And as soon as that happened, it was the next week, or I believe maybe the Friday after that happened, the governor announced that he had to cut the budget because we, as they put it, had a revenue problem and then not a spending problem. And you mentioned spending. Now the money did come in, and he, the governor put it back in the budget and spent most of it. But I kind of, do you think there's really no way to cut taxes the way we want to cut taxes? Let's cut taxes from people who are the job creators, who are the business owners, who are the taxpayers for the most part. If we're going to cut taxes on those, we've got to find a way to let the government exist with less money than they're getting now. We've got to cut how much we're spending. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. There's no way that we're going to be able to really adjust our tax system and have the revenue staying with the job creators the way that it needs to, unless we find a way to be more proficient in our government. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean, when I talk about efficiency of government, you take a look at DHS, it's huge, got a lot of revenue in there, and then at the same time you go down to the county level and you've got your caseworkers down there. They're overloaded. They're pulling their hair out. It's so bad that the turnover is relatively high. And so, one of the things that really need to look at is you take a look at Little Rock, the fact that what I consider there's probably some fat in there. I know there is, but, nobody will admit it. There's fat in Little Rock, and you might not cut those positions out, but you readjust and you send those positions to basically you move them down closer to the tip of the spear where the work is being done directly with the people. Those kind of things need to happen first. Then you look at, where are we, again, more duplication. And I know there's some effort being done trying to look at ways to improve efficiency, but it's slow. And, I feel like we end up having to rely on other people to come and say, all right, we can't afford this and we can't afford that. And sometimes you just need to be able to reach out there and hold on to the problem long enough that you see for yourself, yes, you can. You have, three people doing the same thing here.
Yeah. I think, another way to go about the spending problem is to maybe just not increase spending every year. I mean, the last 3 years we've increased spending $133 million. I guess when Governor Hutchinson first got in office, then 142. This fiscal year now, $165 million. These are, if we just did that, if we just wouldn't have increased as much as we have, we would have, almost $500 million that, could go, hopefully that'd be, tax reform. That'd be great. That'd help out a lot.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree with the idea that we have a revenue problem and not a spending problem. I mean, when you're spending more money than you're bringing in, it doesn't matter why you're not bringing in any money, or the economy's down, or whatever it might be. That creates a spending problem, and to play word games and stuff like that does not change the basic fact that something needs to give. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we need to be able to tighten our belt, and again, I go back to, I think that legislatively we still have relatively new people trying to do this, and there's a lot of folks have to, there's no corporate knowledge in the legislation even yet, even though you've got some folks that have been there a little longer than 6 years now. There still needs to be a little more time. Now, 16 years, that's too long, in my opinion. Something like 10 years I think would have been about right. But 6 years was too little. And I think that when you have just 6 years, you end up with what we see right now, and that's people trying to figure out how to do this. And hopefully it'll get better. But, you're spot on, in my opinion, is that we got to hold the line. We really do. And as a legislator, we've got to have the ability to look at, the other branches and say, no, we don't. We're not going to go that far. Let's do this instead.
I want to go back to the exemption, military retirement exemption. You, sir, are a military retiree and really appreciate your service and your bravery. But on that vote to create that carve-out that also raised taxes elsewhere on the rest of Arkansas, and including some military retirees who buy stuff online and things like that, you didn't vote one way or the other. Do you care to elaborate on that?
Well, that was something that was going to personally benefit me if it passed. And I figured it would pass. However, I did not, in good conscience, did not feel like I should vote for something that would put money in my pocket, even though it's, I'm all about trying to save taxpayers' money. And so that's why I think I voted present, or I might have just not voted at all. I don't remember. But I just didn't feel right about that because, again, it would personally benefit me, and frankly, you kind of need to step aside on some of those type of things, especially when it doesn't affect everybody. Mm-hmm. It just affected a certain group. Now, I agree with trying to bring military retirees into the state. They bring a lot of skills. Generally speaking, they can go a couple of days without smoking dope, and a lot of the other things that seem like we have trouble trying to find people who will do that.
Yeah.
I would have done it a little differently, though, I think, in that, as an officer, my retirement pay is pretty good. And so, I could have gone ahead and kept paying my state taxes and would not have really had that much impact on me. However, for the enlisted folks, they don't get quite as much retirement, and every dollar that you take out of their retirement has an impact. We should have probably just shut it off from, there's no E1s hardly, but E1s all the way through E9 should have been the ones that benefited from this tax break. I would have been willing to let the officers go ahead and continue paying taxes, but there was zero support for that. I can tell you that right now.
I bet. I bet. What's frustrating to me about that is they said that whole plan, though, was going to be revenue neutral. And now we know that the government is actually going to end up getting more money than they did. And I think what's really sad is that if you look at all of the tax increases that were proposed and the ones that were passed and things like that, there are some who say, and I tend to agree with them, that the people of Arkansas, and I think it was State Representative David Meeks who said this when he was doing his impression of the session, that the people of Arkansas are going to be paying more money to the government post-session than they were pre-session. And I think that's what is so frustrating to a lot of folks right now.
Well, and again, if that proves out to be true, and it looks like it will, then, that's the wrong direction. That's not what we campaigned on. That's not what we, promised the people or anything else. We're supposed to be, the party that can find efficiencies and cut spending and be more frugal and basically take care of the taxpayer dollar better. And we can't give up on that. We've got to go ahead and move that direction. And Representative Meeks was absolutely right about that. People are frustrated, and it was frustrating in how, again, to me, the road situation is one of the biggest crises we've got going on in the state. Yet, we wasted all that time on trying to move the internet tax. The first thing we should have been looking at all along was how can we, work with the road. I mean, get their tax increase up there, kill it, then come back and try to find a different way to do it.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen, the priorities, we just had those kind of messed up as far as how that came in, because by the time you got finished getting beat up over internet tax, there was no way, and it could have been the best idea in the world, but if it had something like the word tax in it, nobody would have ever voted for it, because they already had the crap beat out of them, and rightfully so. Mm-hmm. Rightfully so. So, I mean, you got to prioritize what are the real issues and things, and address those first, in my opinion. Because then you get bogged down in all this, feel-good type legislation, which really doesn't have much impact for anybody.
The sponsor, we're talking with State Representative Marcus Richmond. I got one last question for you. The sponsor of the gas tax, State Representative Dan Douglas, after the session was over, he was down at the Rural Development Conference, and I think him and the speaker, I know Dan Douglas was quoted in the paper as saying that maybe the General Assembly will take funding roads seriously when bridges start to collapse and there start to be traffic fatalities. I thought that rhetoric was just, I don't know, a little extreme, kind of sounded like, accusing Republicans of wanting dirty air and dirty water. What are your thoughts on some of the rhetoric, trying to get more money for the government?
Well, I mean, people are frustrated, and sometimes they just say nonsense, things that really he would never mean it or anything else. It just pops out because of frustration. Because whether it's funny how when you take on a bill and start trying to do it, it becomes your baby, and it shouldn't, because there's 99 other people there that might disagree with you, and because they do, you shouldn't be frustrated about it. But Dan Douglas, he does a lot of good things. He's got a lot of good insight. I've gone to him before and asked him questions about things. He's always been forthcoming. And so, I take that with a grain of salt.
Okay. Well, he certainly is the most entertaining state legislator that's down there, let me tell you.
Yeah. Hey, Paul, can I ask one thing?
Yes, sir.
Right quick. I'd just like to ask, your listeners in the state of Arkansas for their prayers for a guy that I'm trying to get out of a Saudi prison. He's a classmate of mine. He was locked up in 2011 on basically suspicion of committing a crime. And he just recently, on July 13th, they come back in after he's been found innocent a couple of times, come back in and gave him the death penalty.
Oh,
and I'm working real hard, and the governor's working hard, and we've got, trying to get the delegation, congressional delegation, everybody working hard to get, his name is Robert Slayton, and he's from Scott County, Arkansas. I went to class with him. We graduated together, and he's over there in a mess now, and we're trying to get him out of that freaking prison over there in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And I would just appreciate the prayers of everybody.
Okay, absolutely. And, you say he's a fellow Arkansan as well. So, and this is something we need to definitely be praying about and reminding our listeners to pray about just, unceasingly. So definitely. Will you send me some information or on that when it comes to you? Because I'd love to just keep this audience up to date on all of that.
Okay. I will. I'll get you some background information as we go along and see what happens. I mean, it's going to be a pretty close call. Like I said, he was resentenced on July 13th of this year. He has 30 days to get in an appeal. And then, from my experience, I lived in Saudi Arabia. I was stationed there a couple of years. They don't mess around.
Yeah.
And again, the thing is that when you look at everything that's happened, this guy did not get a fair trial. He didn't get anything. He hasn't had any support either.
Okay.
So we just need to keep him in our prayers. And I'm going to keep working hard, kicking every door that I can to try to find somebody that's a decision maker, and maybe we can get him out of that. Absolutely.
I want to help any way I can.
I appreciate it.
Okay. State Representative Marcus Richmond, thank you so much, sir.
Okay. Take care, Paul.
All righty.